The cloud of grief has covered the world and every living thing. Teardrops fall upon the pavement, headlines flash throughout the day, people standing still and silent, disbelieving in dismay. My God, one is heard to have shrieked, and other things were surely said. But one main thought rushed through all minds: John Kennedy is dead.
Hello, all of my history-loving friends. This is Madam Morbid. If you're new to this channel, this is not how I normally sound. I've been sick for several weeks now, so I'm just gonna have to do the best that I can and sound the way I sound. Luckily, I'm only doing an introduction. What you're about to see and hear are the voices of people who personally witnessed or participated in the events surrounding the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The time period covered will be November 21st to November 25th, 1963. You're going to hear from law enforcement, civilians, reporters, physicians, soldiers, who were all in some way involved. This is the second part. The last episode was from the point of view of John F. Kennedy. This one will focus on Lee Harvey Oswald. There are a few sources that were absolutely indispensable to me making this video. The 6th floor museum in Dealey Plaza was a godsend. I not only went to the museum, but I think they said something like 1,100 people they have interviewed over the years. Much of it is online. So you can go to their YouTube channel and watch these interviews in their entirety. There were also a couple of channels that shared a lot of the news stories and radio broadcasts. Helmer Reimberg and David Von Payne. If you're at all interested in that kind of material, they have tons of stuff. I don't know where they got it, but I've been very appreciative that it's there. Sadly, most of the people you are going to see are no longer living, but luckily the museum captured their story before they were gone. Homicide detective Jim Lavelle, you're going to hear him anywhere from in his 70s to 99 years old, which is how old he was when he passed away in 2019. Everything you are going to see is primary source material, meaning it's coming directly from something either made at the time of the event, like video footage, or interviews with people who saw it happen. I'm not solving any crimes. I'm not digging into any controversy. I'm just showing you the primary source material. Obviously, it's not comprehensive. I couldn't watch all 1,100 interviews. So I listened to key players, ones that I felt were the most important. So I hope you enjoy listening to this story being told to you by the people who lived it. It's not graphic, it's not controversial, it's just storytelling.
It's 5 o'clock and time for the latest news from WLW Communications Exchange. President Kennedy will visit that rare thing, a Republican city in the South, on Friday. Dallas has turned to the GOP in recent years, but the city is important in Mr. Kennedy's plans for next year, since he carried Texas by only 43,000 votes in 1960. Thursday, the president visited San Antonio, where the reception was warm, and Houston, where it was not so warm. He's spending the night in Fort Worth. Plans to feed the president the biggest, juiciest steak in Texas fell through, though. Secret Service said that it'll choose the president's steak for him at random from the 2,000 that are cooked. This is a customary precaution wherever the president dines at public gatherings.
Only the day before, handbills derogatory to President Kennedy had been found scattered around Dallas. Police collected a dozen or so, but were unable to learn who distributed them. Assistant Chief of Police Charles Batchelor urged citizens to report any suspicious activity along the parade route on Friday, but when he was asked if trouble was expected, he replied,
"We would not think so."
I met them through friends at a party last winter, and then saw more of Marina later. I was interested in talking with her because I was trying to learn the language. Then later they had financial difficulty when he lost his work, and eventually led to my inviting her to live with me in Dallas while she was waiting for her baby that was born in October, and to stay on a couple of months with me, just as one woman with another can help when babies are small. And then I think they expected to get an apartment together when they could afford it, say, after Christmas.
Me, he was a careful guest. He really appreciated the care that Marina was getting and the financial assistance this meant for them. He didn't say much. He didn't talk much. He didn't talk about himself. He talked a few times with my former husband in English, so they could get into a political discussion. But it was clear to me that if you disagreed with him, you weren't a friend.
Lee was he was a man that didn't talk a whole lot. But if you asked him something, he would answer you. He was a very dedicated person. He learned very quickly, and I liked that. A lot of our conversation during the day was strictly business.
During the last weeks of his life, Oswald lived in this rooming house, a few miles from downtown Dallas. The housekeeper, Mrs. Roberts, recalled her lodger well.
Well, he came in the afternoon around between 3 and 4 o'clock. I wanted to rent a room. I had one little small room, this little $8 room, and he'd taken it. And Rachel was OH sleep.
What did he say when he came in?
When I see the room that I had for rent, and I showed him the only one that was to rent, and he taken it. See, he wanted to be closer to his work. But he didn't have the job then at that Texas bookstore. He got it that day and went to work the next morning.
He seemed very mannerly and very tidy. He was very tidy with himself. He just taking care of his own business. He only come in the living room occasionally and look at the television, and he'd go back to his room. He'd make one or two phone calls, usually in the afternoons after coming in from work, and they would always be they wouldn't be in English. He was on here over one weekend.
What was that?
This past weekend. The other times, he would leave usually on a Friday evening, and he would return on a Monday evening.
Bank of chairs there that's showing on the left side of that picture. That's where Lee always sat to have lunch, and Lee always sat by himself. Okay, there it's on the right. The ladies in our group, we always sat in the very back. We always sat there for lunch. And I know he had a friend down in the warehouse, but he always ate alone. And he was always reading strange-looking material. It was a few little paper pamphlet kind of things, and we always wondered what he was reading, what he was thinking. He wasn't terribly friendly. But we, being teenagers, we saw this guy all alone, and we felt sorry for him.
He came up to me on Thursday, and he said, "Can I ride home with you today?" I said, "Sure." I said, "You're always welcome to ride."
"Well, will you be going home with me tomorrow also?" And he said no. He said he wouldn't be going home with me on the 22nd.
But he said, "I'd like to ride out with you because I want to get some curtain rods to put some curtains up in my apartment." Well, how little did I know, never had been over to his rooming house there in Beckley. He already had curtain rods and curtains hanging in his room he rented, but I didn't know that. So I said, fine.
Thursday, when I came home from the grocery store about 5:30 in the evening, Lee was on the front lawn playing with June, his little daughter, and my kids. I was very surprised to see him. He didn't normally come out on a Thursday. Lee helped carry some groceries in, and as we passed, I said, our president, our I can't say it now, nasz president prijedet, our president is coming to town, and he didn't move, just sort of grunted. I put my kids to bed in the one bedroom, and when I came out, it must have been about 9 o'clock, and Lee was already in the bedroom. No sign of him. But I went to work in the garage to paint some blocks that I had made for the kids, and the light was on. I thought, well, that's unusual, and Marina doesn't do that, and why would he have gone to the garage?
On Friday, he got up and he walked down the street, which was about a half a block, and he had this package with him. My sister was at the sink, so she did see him.
I looked out the window and saw a man, whom I learned later was Mr. Oswald, crossing the street with a package approximately 2.5 feet long.
He proceeded across my carport, and I opened the door to see where he was going and saw him put the package into my brother's car.
My mother was sitting at the table with my little nieces and I, and she was startled. She says, "Who is that man looking in the window?" Well, I looked up, and I said, "That's Lee. That's the man that will be riding to work with me." I said, "He works with me at Texas School Bus."
I got up about fairly early, like 7, but he was already gone, and left a coffee cup in the sink, so I saw I'd been there. We just, we hadn't had TV very long, but I watched TV when the president and his wife were due at a breakfast in Fort Worth that morning. They were a little late, as Kennedy joked later, it takes women a little longer.
I got up from the table and I went to the back door, and Lee was staying there on the carport, and I told him, I said, "I'm just about through eating my breakfast." I said, "Let me finish that and I'll brush my teeth and I'll be right on out and we'll take off for work." And that's exactly what we did. Sitting down in the car, I glanced over my shoulder and I saw this package. And I asked him, I said, "Lee," I said, "what's in the package?" He said, "You remember? It's curtain rods." I said, "That's right." I said, "You told me you're going to be taking some curtain rods." So nothing was ever said about the package anymore. It was very cloudy, overcast, and it was misty. A real fine mist on the windshield. And back then, cars didn't have intermittent wipers, so I had to turn the wiper on. The drops were so small, they were just like the size of like a straight pen or a needle. Talking to Lee, I said, "I wish it'd rain or stop this." We didn't do a lot of talking that morning going to work. It was just like any other morning. He rode to work with me. I rode out to Irving with me. Lee just wasn't a big talker. And we got there, we got out. He stood there for a minute, and then he got the package out of the back seat and he walked on ahead of me. He was carrying the package. One end was under his armpit, and then the other was cupped in his hands. In the past, we always walked together, but this particular morning, he walked ahead of me, and I never did catch up with him. I did see Lee several times that morning, off and on. We was working, but I didn't know the time. And we were just going about business. It wasn't too long after we got to work that morning. There was a big buzz. But they had published a proposed route of the presidential parade. They did that a day or two before, I think. And I walked by Mr. Shelley, and he says, "By the way," he said, "you can tell everybody that we're going to stop and we're going to get to go out and watch the parade when it comes by today." Everybody was so happy about that.
I had a dental appointment for my older kid and went off for that about 9 o'clock. But I left the TV on because I knew that when Marina got up, she would want to see what was going on. And then when I came back with my kid from the dental appointment, we sat there watching.
We started walking on Houston Street, and I remember a couple of blocks over, I kept looking at the buildings and the rooftops and the open windows, and I kept wondering, how can they secure all that? And I don't know why, but we got about a block away, and I turned to Terry and I said, if there were to be anything like an assassination attempt, it would probably be here.
We decided we're going to go out there because we're at the very end of the parade, and so we decided we were going to go see him.
But I was standing at the top of the stairs in the shade. I realized one day that I had the best seat in the house because the presidential parade, when it made its turn off of Houston onto Elm there, it's a pretty sharp turn there. And so the limousine had to slow down. It was something I will never forget.
And we were waving and screaming and so excited, and Mrs. Kennedy was just absolutely gorgeous.
My uncle, Steve Ellis, was a motorcycle officer, and he was leading the parade. When I saw him turn the corner and come towards us, I leaned down and I said, "There's Uncle Steve, let's wave." And, he probably just sort of nodded at us and went on.
But I was just struck by Mr. and Miss Kennedy. Jackie was closest to me, and the JFK was on the other side, and JFK had this sort of, way back then he would brush the hair out of his face, and Jackie had this marvelous little, she's carrying the roses, she had this marvelous wave, a great smile, and I turned and I was so carried away, I hollered out something like, "Welcome to Dallas, Mr. President."
And she was leaning over the president and pulling her hair out of her eyes as they were waving to us. And that was the image that I remember when the first shot was fired.
And as it was coming towards us, probably 75 or 100 feet from us, the first two shots rang out. And it was a bang, bang, something like that. And actually, I thought someone had thrown a couple of firecrackers.
We were standing right on the side of the car when the gunshots happened. And me and my father had actually stepped down into the street. And the first shot hit the ground and ricocheted off the ground. And then a police officer falling off of a motorcycle, and then two other shots came right after those two shots.
And I thought it was firecrackers, as Bill did. And the president sort of threw his hands up, and I thought, boy, he has a good sense of humor, because that's very bad taste to do something like that. I'd never been around gunfire before, so I didn't know what it was.
On the second shot, Kennedy was wearing a back brace. He had on this very tightly laced back brace, and he didn't topple over. So he just, he was still upright. So the assassin had, for the third shot, essentially the second shot.
And as the car got closer to us, you could tell something was wrong. I could see the president kind of turning his head into the crowd, and you could see Governor Connolly and his protruding eyes and the blood on his shirt.
I looked directly across and up, possibility at a 45-degree angle. And this man, same man I had saw prior to the president's arrival, was in the window and taking aim for his last shot.
There were three guys hanging out of that fifth floor window, and they were looking up and pointing.
I just looked straight ahead of me because we were facing the book depository. That's where the sound came from. I just looked up there, and there was a rifle resting on the ledge.
After he fired the last or the third shot, he didn't seem to be in a great rush. He seemed to pause for a moment to see if for sure he accomplished his purpose, and he brought the gun back to rest in upright position.
So I said, there's a rifle. And Tom Dillard, Dallas News photographer, was sitting next to me, and he said, where? I pointed out the window. He took a picture of the empty window.
And just as the car passed in front of us, and he was maybe straight out as far as from here to the second row of seats, and the third shot rang out.
When I don't know my own name, I will remember seeing the president's head explode. It was an awful, awful sight, something that you shouldn't have to witness.
But on the third shot, he did topple over. Jackie was screaming.
Then I heard her say, "Oh my God, no, they shot Jack."
Right after the president toppled to the left, Jackie got up and was crawling over the back of the car.
I thought Mrs. Kennedy was trying to get out of the car, and which I found out years later, she was reaching back and picking up a piece of President Kennedy's skull.
And Clint Hill, Jackie's Secret Service agent, had jumped off the minute he heard the first shot, and he ran right in front of me. And he ran as fast as he could, and he barely managed to get over the left rear of the limo and then spread himself down and pushing the president and the first lady and then telling them, go, go, go.
I turned to Gail and I said, that's it, hit the ground. And we turned around, took our two children and pushed them over on the grass and fell down on top of them.
The way he fell over into Mrs. Kennedy's lap, we thought that the shots were coming directly over our head. I was afraid that we might get in a crossfire. I was scared to death for my children. I was scared for Bill.
The crowd started streaming through the railroad yards just past the Texas School Book Depository building. They searched through train cars and through the road yards, could find no one.
It was total chaos. People was running and screaming and falling down and hollering. You didn't know what was going on.
There was so much confusion with people running. I thought at first that some of the spectators farther down the street toward the Elm Street underpass had been hit. I saw many of them throw themselves flat on the ground, and the police officers started blowing whistles and running for the scene. I leaped out of the car I was in the parade and ran for the scene also.
Looked to my left, I observed this scene of bedlam, really, people running covering their children on the grassy knoll. I could see the president's car and Johnson's car disappear under the underpass. A motorcycle policeman rode his motorcycle up the grassy knoll, jumped off. It kept going till it fell over. He went into the front door of the book depository, and he was joined by another policeman. So the two of them went into the building. My first thought was, whoever's shooting at the president is probably not going to get out of that building, probably not alive.
I thought the shots were coming from the building, from the top of the building, because I had talked to some people before he come by that was in the building and said, we're all going to come out and see the president. The whole building's coming out. So with that in my mind, I thought the man had to be on top of the building, not inside it.
The police are now surrounding the area down here. Sirens are screaming, and evidently police believe that the man who fired the shots is still in the Texas School Book Depository building at the corner of Elm and Houston.
Search had seemed to center on the school book depository. There were battery-powered flashlights on the steps that had been brought over from the sheriff's office, and I picked up one of those, and they were searching each floor in the school book depository, and I just happened to be one of the officers that went to the 6th floor.
As we approached the 2nd floor, he continued on around towards the 3rd floor. And I kind of looked off to the right over there through a doorway and saw an image of a man walking away through that doorway. And when I got to the doorway, he was on down there a little bit, and I hollered at him and asked him to come back. I turned around and asked him if the man worked for him and if he knew him. And he said, yes, said he works for me, and I know him. At that time, the man never did say anything. I never did say anything further to him. I turned around and went on up the stairs to the 3rd floor.
I thought, I've got to find a phone. It dawned on me, there's probably one in the depository building. I ran down the street a little bit, ran across the street, and picked up this couple with 2 kids. It turned out to be the Newmans. Stopped and I said, are you okay? And Bill looked up at me. He said, yeah, but he said, they got the president. They blew the side of his head in. And so those were the words that I remembered as I then started up the hill and thought, no, I've got to find the phone. So I ran back down the hill and ran up and went up the steps of the depository building. And there was a guy in the doorway, and I ran up to him and asked him where a phone was, and he jerked his thumb and he said, in there. Back in and went on in, found the phone in the lobby, one of the old black, phones, and called the station. This was within 3 minutes after the shooting.
This is Pierce Allen from the Texas School Book Depository building for WFAA News. Just a few minutes ago, the President of the United States turned from Houston Street onto Elm Street on his way to a scheduled luncheon appearance at the Stemmons Trademark. And as he went by the Texas School Book Depository, headed for the triple underpass, there were 3 loud, reverberating explosions. Nobody moved. Everyone seemed stunned. A few seemed to look around, wondering who has the firecrackers. Then suddenly the Secret Service men sprang into action. The convertible bearing the President and Mrs. Kennedy sped away, and officers, both plainclothes and uniformed, seemed to spring from everywhere at once, guns drawn, ordering people to lie flat. There are 2 witnesses who were near the President's car at the time of the explosions who say that shots were fired from which upper window we do not know. We do not and cannot confirm the reports at this time that the President has been shot. One witness says he definitely was shot, that he was hit twice, that he saw the President slump in his seat. As I say, this is not confirmed at this time. From where I am, the police have 2 witnesses. They are bringing them in now. I'm in the Texas School Book Depository building. They're bringing some witnesses in now. We will try to learn further and relay word to this station.
And then when I came back with my kid from the dental appointment, we sat there watching. and we heard that the president had been shot. And, you know, they didn't have TV cameras on the motorcade. TV was still quite new, and the camera's huge and heavy. But one of the newspaper person reporting on microphone said, he saw a pink cloud rise for the president's head. I thought, oh my God, it's fatal. Oh my God. And I went and got a votive candle and lit it. Marina asked her, is this a kind of way of praying? I said, yeah, it was. And then, more than an hour later, we heard that in fact he had died.
Well, that's when someone came up and knocked on the door of the bus. Although this is no bus stop here, knocked on the door of the bus, and I opened the door, and a man got on the bus and paid his fare. Eddie, we reached this point here, traffic had come to a standstill. In other words, we were sitting here and traffic was stopped, and there was a gentleman that I picked up back up at Murphy Street back here. In other words, he got up and came up and got him a transfer and got off, and which later they identified, the police identified the transfer as the ones that they got on Oswald when he was arrested.
And I went to the front of the building, he went to the back. As I started to go up to it, a construction worker, Mr. Brennan, came up to me and said, I was sitting across the street and I saw the man in the 6th floor shoot all 3 shots. I know what he looks like. The sergeant said, take him with you. So I did. About 3 minutes after the last shot, I was at the front door, and the sergeant went to the back door.
Attention all squads. The suspect in the shooting at Elm in Houston is reported to be an unknown white male, approximately 30, slender build, height 5 feet 10 inches, weight 165 pounds, reported to be armed with what is thought to be a .30 caliber rifle. No further description at this time or information. 1245 KKB 3 South.
You are go for a stereo, you're not?
Line to nose.
You will be at large for the first shooter comes in.
Just looked like an ordinary working man. He was small, had on gray work clothes, brown shirt with a silver stripe and a work jacket. He said he got in and said he wanted to go to 500 block North Beckley. So I come on the way we're going now and turned right on this signal light onto Jackson Street. I come on here to Austin Street, turn left on this light to Austin, to the wood. I didn't know the president was shot at that time, and the police cars and sirens was running all around this end of town, making a lot of noise, so all I said to him was, I wonder what the hell all the commotion is in this end of town. He didn't answer me. So I didn't say any more to him. I figured he was one of these people that didn't want to talk. Right here in the same block, right here, 1018, that house right there.
But he didn't say anything about getting out.
No, sir, and he wasn't looking at it as we passed. And about along right in here, he just said, this will do fine right here, and pulled over to the curb, which was the intersection of Neely and North Beckley. Looked at the meter, and it's 95 cents. He handed me $1, opened the door and got out, walked around in front of the cab and across the street, and that's the last I saw him. I went on about my business.
Well, I was listening, had the television on, listening, trying to find out what happened to President Kennedy when he came in. It must have been after 1 o'clock. He wasn't running, he was just in a fast walk. I just said, are you sure are you in a hurry? And he didn't answer me, he didn't say that. When he went out walking fast the same way.
as some other officers were with me, 5 or 6, and we lined up along the east wall of the school book depository, 6th floor, and started walking across to the west side of the building. There were stacks and stacks of books, 4 and 5 cases high, across the whole floor. Seemed like they'd just been randomly placed. Officer Luke Mooney, a deputy sheriff, found what's been referred to as the sniper's nest in the southeast corner of the building. I went over and took a look at it, and there were some boxes piled up that looked like they could be used for a rifle rest. Also observed a partially eaten chicken meal and some spent shells on the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt CBS momentarily for a local bulletin with Joe Scott.
Thank you. We're down here at the scene of the current manhunt that must be over 24 squad cars blocking the intersection of Elm and Houston Street. 2 parents are just returned from the building where they think they have this man surrounded, or where he shot from, and they found 4 shells on the... What floor was it on, Steve? Joe, Jerry Hill with the Dallas Police Department just leaned out a window there. It looked to me like he was on the 4th floor, and told police to call the Dallas Crime Laboratory to the scene. Apparently they found some shells there in that room here in the Texas School Book Depository building at Elm and Field Street. They have brought the fire department rescue squad to the scene. We now have several witnesses being taken to Sheriff Bill Decker's office for further questioning. A fire truck is here. They're fixing to put a ladder up to the building. So far, no one has been apprehended, but more than a score of Dallas policemen are standing with riot guns or shotguns, poised on their hip, ready and looking upward. This is Joe Scott from the scene now, returning you to KRLD News.
There's this additional detail from the hospital. An assistant to Governor Connolly said he talked to the governor in the hospital operating room. He said the governor was shot just below the shoulder blade in the back. The assistant, Bill Stinson, said he asked the governor how it happened, and he said, I don't know. I guess from the back they got the president too. These are quotes from Governor John Connolly, who was also wounded. There are additional reports that the governor's aide asked the governor if there was anything he could do, and all the governor said was just take care of Nellie for me. That is Governor Connolly's wife.
He just pulled him over, and I'd done the same thing many times. I was looking for somebody, and I'd see somebody walking along the street that resembled him. I would stop him and talk to him, and of course, 99 times out of 100, you sent them on the way because they wouldn't know who you're looking for. That's what would have happened with Tippit. Had Oswald been able to think long enough about it.
I had 4 witnesses. I never had 4 witnesses before on a murder or since.
All of them gave about the same description.
I was preparing to turn left on 10th Street from Denver. I noticed an individual walking in my direction with a light zipper jacket on, darker pants, and a squad car pulling over to the curb.
The police car was driving very slow down 10th Street. Well, the man kept walking, that's like I say, with his hands down in his head. This police car kept coming on, and finally he stopped, and the man stopped. And whether the policeman say, come over to the car, talk to him, I don't know, but he went.
As I approached the squad car, I noticed that that individual was leaning over talking to the officer, and he had both hands in the pockets of his jacket.
And stepped back, got 2 steps. The policeman calmly opened the door. He calmly crawled out. And the policeman walked he was the front wheel on the driver's side, and this man shot him in the wink of your eye.
I continued through the intersection, and about in the middle of the intersection I heard 3, maybe 4 shots.
Oswald pulled out this pistol and went into that Marine stance that he'd been taught, and just bang, 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 bang 4 times. He didn't move his gun up and down, he had left it steady. And so the first shot that hit Tippit was low along the belt area, and the next one a little higher. We went forward with the first shot, and he was turning to his left, and the bullet walked on up his body as he fell. When he was going down, he fell on his left side, and as he went down, his head passed the line of shots, and the bullet hit him in the temple and come out the top.
He walked fast down the sidewalk, back towards me, and then he seen me. And then he done like this. And of course I did too, and then I slapped my hands upon my face. But I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. What would I do?
I started a slow run toward my direction. I put my car in gear and drove forward and watched him through the rearview mirror. And I was within 10, 15 feet of that individual, and it was Lee Harvey Oswald.
And I opened my fingers, and I looked, and he was trotting off down across this water pier. And he wasn't even out of sight. He saw me go to the policeman. Now, he could have killed me, too. I knew I had to get help for this man. And I knew this police car, all police cars got radios in them. I'll do what I can to get help for this man. And I tried.
I looked up the street, that's 10th Street right there. I didn't notice the gun until he was on the other side of the street. I could see clearly he had this pistol in the Marine Corps called the raised pistol position. I hollered at him. I said, man, what in the hell is going on? And he almost stopped and said something to me which I could not understand, and then continued on down Patton. I ran down the direction of the shooting, down toward Patton and 10th Street, and when I rounded the corner I could see a squad car there. I saw Officer Tippit laying in the street. I could tell by looking at him that he was dead. He was laying on his pistol. He had drawn his pistol. His strap on his holster was unsnapped. I imagine that he had drawn his pistol while he was falling because he was laying under his left side. I took the pistol from under him and laid on top of the hood of the squad car. I saw him that night in the police lineup. They asked me to come down to police headquarters, and I identified him in the lineup as the man that I had seen running with a pistol in his hand.
Did you have any trouble identifying him in the lineup?
None whatsoever.
We've got a shooting right here. Where is it at? It says Music Place Radio. What location? Between Los Angeles and Berkeley. It's a police officer. Somebody shot him. What's it? 410th Street. 78. It's in a police car. Number 10. 78. 78. Hello, police officer, did you get that? Police officer, 510 East Jefferson. Thank you.
Went back and continued across the 6th floor, and when I got to the northwest corner of the building, there were 2 rows of books there stacked 2 cases high. I shined my light in the crevice between 2 rows of books, and there was the rifle. I hollered, "Here's a rifle," and I looked at my watch, and it was 1:22 p.m. I never touched the rifle.
Now, I want to have a Title 19 involving police officer, 400 East 10th suspect, last seen running west on Jefferson, no description at that time.
About that time, I heard on the sheriff's squawk box talk about an officer shot in Oak Cliff. I picked up the phone and called my lieutenant and asked him who was covering that. Well, he said, "I don't have anybody," so I volunteered for it. So I went to the scene where Tippit was shot. And of course, there's a pretty good crowd there by that time. The officer that had got the call on it, who is supposed to take control of a scene like that and not let people run amok in it, but in this case he had not. Right behind him by about 25 feet was an apartment with 2 sisters in it, and they heard the first shot and they run to the door. And they saw Oswald shoot the 3rd shot. When Oswald finished up, he turned to run. He run by the porch where the Davis sisters were standing and kicked the empty holes out of his gun. There was a cab driver parked under a shade tree about 40 feet eating his sack lunch. He could see the whole thing. When he started walking over towards his cab, he said, "I got scared he's going to hijack me and take my car." So he said, "I got out and run around and hid behind my car." As he passed that, he said to himself, "The poor dumb cop," or "the poor damn cop." The driver wasn't sure what he said. That told me Oswald had no intention of shooting that off. If he'd just been using his head a little bit and gave Tippit his identification and everything, Tippit would have looked at it and passed him on. Oswald wasn't thinking fast enough to do that.
There was a lady with the street across, had a full view, and then the two sisters had the full view, and then the cab driver had a full view of it. I never had such good witnesses in my life.
279. 279. We believe we've got this suspect on TMS also out here. Got his white jacket, believes he dumped it on the parking lot behind this service station at 400 Block East Jefferson, crossing Dudley Hughes. And he got a white jacket on. We believe this is it. Well, we do not have the suspect, is that correct? No, just a jacket laying on the ground.
John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound in the brain. I have no other details regarding the assassination of the President.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States is dead. John F. Kennedy has died of the wounds received in an assassination in Dallas less than an hour ago. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, is dead at the age of 46, shot by an assassin as he drove through the streets of Dallas, Texas, less than an hour ago.
The president is DOA, and at that time I become emotional. We looked down and according to books, and we all looked down. I was looking on the front of a book, and Christ says, Christ leads the way. And we pointed to that, and he says, that beats anything I ever saw. And I don't know what officer said that. So that's a miracle that happened. Because the older I get, the emotional I get. I'm 86 years old. Not too many of us left around.
I got an eyeball witness to the getaway man that suspect in this shooting. He's white male, 27, 5 feet 11, 165, black wavy hair, fair complected, wearing a light gray Eisenhower type jacket, dark trousers, and a white shirt. And last seen running on the north side of the street from Patton on Jefferson, on East Jefferson. And he was apparently armed with a 32 dark finished automatic pistol, which he had in his right hand.
Then he went up Jefferson Street, and then I guess he saw two police cars coming, and he turned into a shoe store, pretended to be looking at shoes.
Broadcast a description on the radio of this man who was 5'8", 5'9", 150 pounds, and this Oswald matched the description. And just a few minutes before he walked into the lobby, on the radio they had a bulletin that an officer had been shot here in Oak Cliff. He walked in, the police made a U-turn, and he looked over his shoulder. He just looked scared. His shirt tail was out, and he looked like he'd been running.
Mostly it was his action as to trying to avoid what everybody else was trying to see. And then as soon as the police cars all went by, he looked over his shoulder and turned and walked out back onto the sidewalk on Jefferson toward the Texas Theater. I just saw him walk in. I said, something's not right here.
So the shoe store man, he told the ticket seller there, he said, I think the man that shot the officer just went in here. He said, you ought to call the police.
If we have information that a suspect just went into Texas Theater on West Temple, supposed to be hiding about.
I wonder what in the hell am I doing, you know? Seriously, am I carrying this too far? You know, what? Did I really see that?
Several hundred officers swarmed through every entrance in the theater.
Then I heard this noise outside and opened the door, and the police grabbed me and asked me what I was doing there, and I told them, and they asked me if the man was still in theater? I said, yes.
And in just a few moments, I mean, this was quick, the house lights came on, the movie was still playing. I looked up between the curtain and I saw him just sitting there just a couple of rows from the back, 5 or 6 seats.
As Officer McDonald approached a suspect sitting on the third row from the back of the theater, the suspect jumped up, yelled, "This is it," and took a swing at the officer. Officer McDonald started to grapple with the man. As he reached for a gun which was concealed under his shirt, the gun was fired one time by the suspect, but luckily it misfired. McDonald yelled for help.
The officers jumped him, wrestled the gun away from him, and then pulled him out through the doors with him screaming, "I protest this police brutality." He was really fighting them all the way, kicking and screaming and hollering until he got to the front entrance of the theater. There was a crowd, I'd say, of 2,000 or 3,000 people had been attracted to the theater by all of the screaming sirens and people descending on the area.
I attempted to drive over there, but the traffic was such I couldn't get there then. So I told them to take him to my office and that I'd meet him there. Well, they were in a marked car and I was in a plain car, so they got there ahead of me. And when I arrived at my office, they had Oswald sitting in what we call an interrogation room. It's just a room with a desk and chairs, no phone or anything in it, so we can talk without being interrupted. And I went in and sat down and started talking to him. And I was talking to him about the murder of J.D. Tippit.
He said, "I didn't shoot anybody."
I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir. I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for.
Well, I thought it was a little strange in a way because I had worked 2 other police officers' murders, and usually when they were talking to them about the shooting, they would say, "I didn't shoot the policeman," or "I didn't shoot the cop." But I finally figured out a little bit later why he answered it that way, because he knew we were going to wreck him with that other one. So he was getting his denial in earlier. I didn't shoot anybody.
And at that time, he answered all my questions willingly, and as soon as I asked him, he didn't hold back on anything. Of course, he didn't answer them all truthfully, but couldn't imagine anybody who had just killed 2 people could be so calm and collected as he was. Captain Fritz had just came back from the school book depository where they had found the rifle and the empty holes under the window and so forth, and he'd also found out that Oswald was missing from the school book depository without permission to be gone. And Captain said, "I want to talk to that man, give me his address." So they gave him his address and everything, but he had given them a phony address. He didn't live there, so they were out there. So the cap come in and in a flurry and was gathering up people to go send different directions to look for him.
Has the gentleman been identified?
Yes, sir. He's been identified for killing the officer.
Right. Has any identification been attempted for the killing of the president?
Not yet.
Somebody in the office there said, "The captain, the man Lavelle's talking to, has got a name similar to that." So Cap come to the door and opened it and asked me what his name was, and I told him, and then he asked all of us, "Where do you work?" He said, "At the school book depository." The captain says, "You're the man I want." So I lost my prisoner. The captain took over, and I never questioned him any further.
Marina says she was the only one that knew about this note that he had left when he went out to try to kill somebody in April. We were out hanging up diapers, and I went out to tell her that they said the shots had been fired from the depository. I didn't notice, but she went into the garage to look for the rifle, recognizing that it might be Lee, and she thought it was there, but it wasn't.
I don't know what this is all about.
Kill the president?
No, sir, I didn't. People keep asking me that. Sir?
You shoot the president?
I work in that building.
Were you in the building at the time?
Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir.
Back up, man.
Come on, man. No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
Maybe mid-afternoon, when 6 police officers arrived at the door, saying they had the Oswald in custody for shooting an officer. And we by now had heard that an officer had been shot, and one of the officers asked, "Did Lee have a rifle?" And I said no, and then translated to Marina, who said yes, he did, and led them into the garage and there on the floor was this blanket roll, and the policeman picked it up and just folded over his arm. It was so clearly empty, and this was the worst moment ever, because I thought, oh my God, it could have been Lee. It could have been Lee. And I was, doing whatever I could to help the officers, except they were not, they did take a lot of stuff they didn't need to take.
The turmoil in the lineup room had long before been taken over in the police station corridors. Everyone was there wanting to see Oswald, wanting to be shown the rifle. A police officer brought the rifle out. Foreign-made, the press was told. Reporters were asking questions, newspaper photographers were hustling for better angles, television cameramen were feeding pictures, and one interested bystander was just looking on that Friday night. His name, Jack Ruby.
We went bowling one night. Jack got a strike, and it must have been one of the grandest days of Jack's life to have done something good. He was just pleading with me to tell him how wonderful he is. Jack was desperately needing attention. And then he called himself getting into big time, where he got in this carousel club. I doubt if it ever made him any money, but he liked to wear a suit and greet people at the top of the stairs and be a big man in the Dallas entertainment business, and he wasn't.
I didn't take him home with me and eat chicken. But he's a friend on the corner, which hundreds of other people were, and he's friendly. I liked him. Well, he's a very emotional person. I've seen him just be telling me something that happened to him, and just for telling me that he'd go in a rage and just shake all over it.
We did a show called Sticks and Stones, but we got a bid to go back across the street at the Adolphus, and he was a wonderful man. He was a lot of fun and had a great personality, but he had a violent temper, and when we told him that we were going to go back across the street, he got very angry, and he hit my partner Joe Peterson and knocked him down the stairs and knocked out a tooth. We had no idea it was even coming. It was like he was talking to us and got violently angry.
He was always looking for something different to get people to come to his club. Knowing him the way I did, I believe he thought he could shoot Oswald, be the man that shot the man, which, the code of the West, and that no jury would ever convict him, and he could go back and operate his business and be the main attraction.
Michael and I had been separated for a year at this point. When he heard on the radio the shots had been fired from the school book depository, he drove over to the house to try to help to see what was going on. So he was there and went with us and the police officers down to the police station.
This is the wife and the brother of the family coming out now. If you'll shoot right down the hall here. The wife and the family coming down, and the brother is in a light coat. The wife is on the right, or on your left as you're looking at the screen, a very slight woman. Next to her is a gray-haired lady. The wife of Oswald is carrying a child as they move down the hall. The suspect is coming down the aisle and into identification room. So far we won't be able to pick him up until he's been brought in front of our cameras. There he is, a slight fellow with some scratches.
I positively know nothing about this situation here. I would like to have legal representation.
You have been.
Nobody said what?
Sir? You have been.
Nobody said what? Okay, we can't hear you back. Okay.
What did you do in Russia?
A policeman hit me.
That was Oswald. Lee Oswald, who was charged with the murder of the President of the United States, so he said he did not know him.
But he was assigned to me as my prisoner, therefore everything that took place went through me. And when we was transferring him, it was still since he was my prisoner, it was up to me to head up the moving. And that's how I come out to be handcuffed. That was one question that's been asked quite a bit. Why was I handcuffed to him? But he was my prisoner. He was assigned to me.
We were getting him prepared for the transfer, and I handcuffed I put a set of handcuffs on him, like from wrist to wrist, and then I handcuffed my left wrist to his right. And prior to moving downstairs, I told him, I said, Lee, if anybody shoots at you, I hope they're as good a shot as you are. Meaning, of course, they'd hit him and not me. And he kind of laughed, and that's the only time that I saw him smile while he was in custody.
Why did he laugh? I figured that out too, because I complimented him on his shooting, and that's what he was looking for, was some credit for whatever he was good for.
And he said, oh, nobody's going to shoot at me. I said, well, if they do, you know what to do, don't you? And he said, Captain Fritz has told me to follow you, so I'll do whatever you do. And I said, well, in that case, you'll be on the floor in a hurry. I had no idea how quickly that was going to happen. I asked Ruby how he got into the basement. Well, we made many mistakes, the police department did, over that weekend, and one of them was we only had one officer guarding that entrance ramp. He said when he walked up there, a police car came out, driven by Lieutenant Pierce, and had a sergeant with him. And the officer standing there guard had to walk probably as far as rid of that post there out of the street to hold up traffic so he could make a left turn and go around the building. Jack said, when that officer turned his back and started out in the street, I just darted behind the car and went down and mixed with the news people and worked my way to the front. He got in there by the break of 5 or 10 seconds.
And I saw Jack Ruby, he was standing right there in front, and he had the pistol in his left hand, holding it against his left leg right tight. And of course I knew immediately what was going to happen when I saw that.
Lee Oswald has been shot. There's a man with a gun. It's absolute panic here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. Detectives have their guns drawn.
I walked in and he made 2 quick steps, which brought him into arm's length to me. And I reached over past Oswald, caught him by the left shoulder and was pushing back. But he had switched the pistol over to his right hand and shot. I jerked Oswald back, trying to pull him behind me. So when I jerked back on him, I turned his body. Instead of the bullet hitting him dead center, it hit him about 4 inches to the left of the navel on the left side.
Suddenly, a shot rang out from right above our heads, and about this time, Oswald grabbed his stomach and slumped to the floor, and someone said, "Oh no."
Switching now to Bob Huffaker downstairs.
Oswald will be moved quickly outside, and the only word so far is that the shot came from a man wearing a black hat and a coat. Here comes Oswald. He is ashen and unconscious at this time, now being moved in. He's not moving. He's in the ambulance now, and attendants, police are quickly climbing in. They're now having to remove the armored truck.
This is the armored truck on the outside of the Dallas Police Department. It's being moved out onto Commerce Street, and now the ambulance is coming out. The ambulance with Lee Harvey Oswald, who was shot just a few minutes ago as he was being transferred from the city jail to the county courthouse.
When he turned, the bullet went in on the left side and went across the back of his abdomen and injured both of the 2 main blood vessels in the body, the vena cava and the aorta. And usually you bleed out immediately when that occurs, but as luck would have it, he didn't.
They examined him later on. I could roll that bullet around underneath the skin just like that with my thumb and finger. When I got him to the hospital out there and rolled him into the operating room, the doctors was already there, ready to go. I told them, I said, before you do anything else, I want that bullet out of him. And I showed them where it was, and they just pinched it up and hit it with a scalpel, and it popped out into a tray that a nurse was holding. I wiped it off, took my pocket knife, and I gave it to the nurse that was holding the tray. And I told her, I said, I want you to scratch your initial on the butt end of this bullet, because you and I, somewhere down the line, is going to be testifying that this is a bullet come out of Oswald. And she did that.
And we were able, though, to get down to the wound almost. Dr. Shires was doing the operating. Dr. Jones and I were helping. And Dr. Perry was there also. And just as Dr. Shires got down near where he might get clamps on those two major injuries, then Oswald, who had suffered a great deal of shock and his heart had been injured, he arrested. And Dr. Perry and I dropped out of surgery, opened his chest and massaged his heart for some time. And initially we thought cardiac activity would come back, but then finally it got flabbier and flabbier until it was apparent the heart would not recover.
I reviewed our patients that had a combined aorta and vena cava injury, went back as far as I could find the records. After that, we had never saved a patient that had that combined injury. He had, in addition to that, he had the diaphragm, the lung, the liver, the pancreas injury, and the right kidney. Sort of what you'd do with what we call a shish kebab. He just got everything.
I transferred Jack Ruby the next day. I didn't handcuff myself to him. Neither did I tell the media I was going to go taking him either. Bringing him down, he wanted to wear my hat, my coat, and everything. He was afraid somebody was going to shoot him. So I told him, I said, well, you don't have anything to worry about. You're not worth killing anyhow. But I asked him why he shot Oswald. And he said, well, I just wanted to be a hero. And he says, looks like I've messed things up good. I said, well, you can certainly say that again.
This is the drill team, but it was the Death Watch unit. The Death Watch Joint Service Unit has one officer and 4 NCOs at the casket. The officer at the head of the casket, 4 NCOs, one from each service at the corner of the casket. When the president is lying in repose and later when he lies in state at the Capitol. So the Death Watch team and I left for Gaula's funeral home. When you stay in the Death Watch, you're 30 minutes on, 2 hours off. The 2 hours off, it takes 20 to 25 minutes to get on ceremonially and 20 minutes to get off ceremonially. You have to repress your uniform, reshine your shoes, reshine your Sam Brown belt, repolish your brass. So 2 hours you have off is enough time really to have a cup of coffee. And if you were a smoker, smoke a cigarette, dress up and get ready to go again. It doesn't sound like it's draining, but it really is.
After the dignitaries left, the White House was left kind of empty, but for me and a few other people. And I got to wandering around. I went and there's a cross hall that goes from the East Room over to the State Dining Room. And on the tables in the cross hall were the newspapers from the Library of Congress that were laid out and open to the illustrations that were hand-drawn at the time, of course, about the Lincoln funeral. And the White House had been draped with black crepe in exact imitation of the Lincoln funeral.
Once we left, we were taking from Gaula's funeral home down to the White House. By this time, it was fairly close to midnight. Taken down to the second level below the White House was a galley down there. And then since the Army Lieutenant Sawtelle, and one Marine and one sailor, one Air Forceman and one Coast Guard would be on the first death watch, I was put in charge of a cordon inside the White House from the entrance L-shaped again into the East Room where the president was going to lie in repose. First I realized there's no public was allowed when the president lie in repose in the East Room. We had about 2 or 3 false alarms, which we were told the president is coming. We got dressed, we went back upstairs, formed the cordon. A couple of minutes later, they say, oh, misinformation. The third time that occurred was close to 4:30 in the morning, and it was for real.
Now the funeral coach, U.S. Navy, it's gray. The shades are drawn on both sides. A flag is over the casket. I can see the flag through the rear of the funeral coach as it goes by. The United States flag over the casket, the blue field toward the rear, and at the left, the president's head apparently at the rear as the casket was moved in. Now the hearse is at the north portico under the beautiful white marble columns.
They came out and formed the cordon, led by Lance Corporal Lord. They came in, formed up in front of the White House. I marched them down to the gate, faced them about. They were in 2 ranks. The president arrived in a hearse.
Now the casket has been removed from the hearse, and the military contingent is carrying the flag-draped coffin into the White House.
And we escorted to the entrance of the driveway. We broke into two ranks on either side of the driveway. The body bearers, led by Army Lieutenant Sam Byrd, got the president's casket from the hearse and took it into the East Room and put it on the catafalque.
The gentleman leading the procession took his hat off as he went in. The casket has now gone through the doorway under the black mourning cloth that drapes the entranceway.
Off to, as I look at to the left, you'll see two Jesuit priests. The two priests were there the entire time the president lay in repose. Not those two, but they rotated as well. And they were saying prayers, which I couldn't hear, but you could hear the beads clinking against the mahogany altar they had. So when you stand there, the head of the casket, not a sound except the murmur of the two priests. If you let it, it can get to you. I try not to pay attention to what's going on. In my case, I started doing math problems in my head.
It's probably one of the saddest sights Washington has ever seen, and I suppose some should offer the hope that it never has to see another one like this happen. There's very little more we can say. In a manner of speaking, perhaps John F. Kennedy has come home. I think one of the things that might be appropriate at this time, he liked to quote from Robert Frost many times on the campaign, and Mr. Frost was one of his favorites. Mr. Frost died earlier this year, but one of the president's favorite quotations, and I believe it went something like this: "I have promises to keep and many miles to go before I sleep." And with that, this is Sid Davis reporting from the White House.
Mrs. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy walked into the room and went to the casket and opened the casket and stood there for approximately 10 seconds or so. And Bobby Kennedy shook his head and said no, and he looked at Mrs. Kennedy and she said she shook her head too. So they closed the casket and then knelt down, said a prayer, and left. And I turned to the Secret Service man who was standing next to me, and I said, "What was that all about?" And he said they were making a decision of whether or not there would be an open casket for the VIP and head of state visits during Saturday at the White House.
Later on that Saturday, I had gotten up at 4 or 5 in the morning, Friday morning, to go to work. And I hadn't been home yet. And I think I was on the 10 o'clock death watch. I could see they're putting up folding chairs at the foot of the casket. Right close to 10:30, Captain Groves came in and whispered in my ear, "They're going to have a family mass, so just stay on the watch, stay at attention." Bang, that's it. So the mass started at 10:30. Everybody sat at the foot of the casket in the folding chairs. Front row was Jackie Kennedy, John and Caroline, Robert Kennedy, Ethel, their children, Ted Kennedy and his wife, a lot of staff members, probably some senior senators. I'm not sure, I don't remember, but there was a good 40 or 50 people. And it went on for close to an hour. And at the end of the mass, the people started to leave. And then when they were all gone, Ted Kennedy and his wife came up to the casket. At the same time, Mr. Joe Hagan, right, from Garler's Funeral Home, came in, folded the flag down, and opened the casket. Ted Kennedy and his wife knelt and stood there for several minutes, it seemed like. They left, and then followed by Robert Kennedy and Ethel and their children. Same thing, saying some prayers. I could not hear the prayers. I could hear the voices. I could hear the murmuring. And then Jackie came with Caroline and John, and then she had John and Caroline leave. Secret Service man picked them up. And I'm looking straight ahead, but I'm catching this in my peripheral vision. Again, I can hear them, but I can't distinguish what they're saying. And then she got up and put something in the casket. Don't ask, don't have a clue, don't know. Was starting to get caught up in what was happening here for two reasons. One, it was happening right there and I could hear the murmurs. And two, I was getting tired because we were way beyond the hour and a half mark now. But anyway, she put something in the casket and then she turned to leave and went about 6 paces away from the casket, stopped and turned And it was the most forlorn look I think I've ever seen. Destroying me now, but just about destroyed me. Then she left, and it was over. I could feel myself sigh, because we were close to the 2-hour mark. I stand at attention in the East Room.
We were marching to the beat of only a drum. It was very solemn. There was no noise aside from the drum beat and the clip-clop of horses from the caisson where President Kennedy's casket was. All I was saying is that I hope when we make the turns that everybody's in line and everybody's in step.
Well, of course, it was larger, and the public was invited. But there were some small things. Remember I asked you, you heard the clicking sound when we marched up the driveway? Well, we were in double-soled heels and soles, leather, and my heels had horseshoe metal cleats on them, so it sounded good when we marched, and when we crunched to attention, you hear the crack. Problem was, at the rotunda, the floor was marble, and even though we entered and left at a funeral dirge, which is 60 steps a minute as opposed to 120, it was like an ice pond out there. If you just put yourself in that position in a minute and manage yourself, what it looks like on ice when your feet start to slip, you see yourself, well, that's the thought is in my mind. I thought, the foot of the casket was pointed towards the doors of the rotunda, which were open, 30-some-odd degrees outside. And back of me in a semicircle arc were all the TV cameras and all the lights. So when you stood there at the casket, you had 30 degrees on your forehead, 180 or 200 degrees on the back of your neck. You had perspiration running down the neck, down to your spine, and in the front you were cold. And on top of that, there were some 250 or 300,000 people that viewed the casket and the remains at the Capitol. And they were some long, up to 6 blocks long, waiting, 6 and 10 abreast, up to 2-3 hours from the time they're in line to get into the immense crowd. Bang, flashbulb. Pretty soon you stand there and you got little red gremlins and yellow gremlins running through your eyes. You start to get dizzy. You can hear people sobbing. You can hear them whispering, in some cases talking. And then on top of that, it seemed like every 5 minutes or so, there'd be a dignitary that came in from one of the hallways. They part the crowd, and a dignitary come in at the foot of the casket, photo shoots. There might have been Charles de Gaulle or another premier or prime minister of some country. There were 90 countries here for the funeral. Having had some experiences at the White House, I just decided I picked that spot on the rotunda wall above the doors and just stared at that and tried to divorce myself as much as I could from anything going on. So in reality, much of what happened around me was just kind of a blur.
It was a long day on Monday, taking the president from the Capitol to the Cathedral to Arlington Cemetery. Exhausting. My feet hurt through the whole march. When I got home, it must have been 8 o'clock or so. It just happened to be my first wedding anniversary. So I stopped at the Officers Club and bought a bottle of champagne and went home. And as my wife helped me fix my bloody feet, we had a glass of champagne and went to bed. It was a wonderful time. It was truly a time of Camelot, and it's just a shame that this wonderful man had to be taken from us.
Like the everlasting flame that burns for this Father, brother, and Son, we proceed with his unfinished victories and protect those he has won. Though he is gone and will speak no more, we all can safely say that although we grieve, we must march with time, for he would want it that way.
Facing life with 3 children without him, it seems almost impossible.
It was just so unreal and so unbelievable to have lost the love of my life. We'd grown so close together that he was the other part of me that was just missing. I just didn't see how it was going to carry on. Curtis, like 18 days been 5 when his dad died. The saddest thing to me was that he was sitting at window because our house faced the street, and Jay would always come home down that street. So he'd sit in that window in the evening and would look for his dad.
So I have little memories of going with him up to the hardware store. I think had an old 50-something Chevrolet where the floor was rusted out in the back. I remember dropping little things down in the holes. Coming back and towards in the neighborhood and seeing if I could tell him how to get back home. It's so funny that before he died, I was doing some coloring book and I asked him to color one. And he colored this frog and whatever, and of course it looked real good, nothing like mine. I remember looking and looking for that coloring book after he died, and I never could find it.
I remember pulling myself into a shell and just sort of keeping my grief inside for a long time, crying in the bathtub. I remember he was always laughing, always smiling, dancing. I remember dancing standing on his feet to Nat King Cole, and had a wonderful sense of humor. I would always laugh around him. And there was a pet spider up in the corner he named Elmer. And just anything to make us kids laugh. He was a great father. He wanted to be with us. We definitely felt loved.
Right after he was killed, there was a number of people at the house. The phone rang. JD's friend was there, and he picked it up. He called me and said, Robert Kennedy was on the phone. I went to the phone. He said he was sorry about the death of my husband, that if his brother hadn't come to town, that my husband would still be alive. I said, yes, you're right. If he hadn't come to town, JD would still be alive. But the president was doing his job, and JD was doing his. And JD just happened to be killed, the president was. That was a wonderful thing for him to do, to call me. I was just a patrolman's wife. Johnson called me the next day, and he expressed his sympathy. Then Mrs. Conley called me. She sent me 24 roses. Mrs. Kennedy didn't call me, she sent me a letter.
Dear Mrs. Tippit, what can I say to you? My husband's death is responsible for you losing your husband. Wasn't one life enough to take on that day? I lit a flame for Jack at Arlington that will burn forever. I consider that it burns for your husband too, and so will everyone else who ever sees it. With my unexpressible sympathy, Jacqueline Kennedy.
I think I felt to hear the president's wife telling me that. That's the thing that you always want, is somebody that just can understand how you feel. And she did. She recognized that I was suffering too.
I was in Dallas, in the Dallas Bureau. We got a tip that there would be the funeral at Rose Hill Cemetery in Fort Worth the next day. Jerry Flemons of the Star-Telegram, one of my longtime friends, and great writer, and he said, you know, Cochran, he said, if we're going to write a story about the funeral of Lee Harvey Oswald, we're going to have to bury this son of a bitch ourselves. So when I showed up early, the police escort delivered the casket about 1:30. There were nothing but cops and feds and reporters and photographers. That was it. And then finally the 5 members of the family showed up, and the 5 members, of course, were Marina the widow, and then her 2 daughters, Harvey's mother, Marguerite, who's a story unto herself, and then his brother Robert, 5 members of the family. They showed up somewhat late after we'd gotten there and everything. As we were waiting, one of the strangest things, somewhere around 3 o'clock, a rumor started that the casket was empty, that there was nobody in the casket, and if there was anybody in that casket, it was not Lee Harvey. So it caused such a stir that the police chief, Cato Hightower, and a couple of officers went into the little chapel, checked, and came back out and assured us that at least Oswald was. I think it was a guy named Grudy who was the undertaker. One of them asked me to be, because of Associated Press, asked me to be a pallbearer. And I said not only no, but hell no. The UPI staffer at the scene, just a super guy, he just jumped up and he said, you know, I'll be a pallbearer. Well, I wasn't stupid enough to realize what had just happened. So I told him, I said, I've changed my mind. I will be a pallbearer. So by default, and thanks to the guy from UPI, I became a pallbearer. It turned out there were 4 or 5 reporters were pallbearers, 3 of them from the Star-Telegram, and myself with the AP. There were no friends, nobody besides the family. So there really was nobody. They had to recruit pallbearers.